Hello, 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 you guys. By now, you've seen several of my videos. If you have not, feel free to go back and watch. In those videos, I've shared a little bit and keeping it solely on what God has placed in my spirit. Everyone has a story, or everyone can have a story turned testimony. So with me doing this walk with God and me being a willing vessel, it is important that I share my story turned testimony. And there's a lot of pieces to it, so that'll take some time. But for today, I'll share with you the part that God has placed on my heart to share, because in my previous video on yesterday, I was sharing about, or the day before yesterday, I should say, I was sharing on how God strategically expressed what it is that I have been feeling, and some of you all out there may be feeling in regards to coming up on the 9th month, which is the month of birthing. And he put it in the perspective of a woman giving birth, but you can go back and look at that video. So I want to touch on that a little more, because in transparency, in sharing the story turned testimony, I believe that is very impactful. I believe that allows those who are seeking after God or want to be in relationship with God, it is important that they know the story turned testimony, because that shows how God shows up and how God is with us, even though the journey can be hard, right? So in December of last year, God had told me to close my business of 7 years. If you look in my bio, you'll see there I'm an esthetician, amongst other things. I had my skincare business for 7 years. And honestly, he had been pulling on me to close it prior to that. And I didn't follow through with it. But in December of last year, it was okay. It is a definite. There is no if and buts about it. So I went ahead and closed in December. There were some life changes taking place in my old state that I was living in, and God had been telling me that it was time for me to go back home to where I was born and raised, which was Chicago. And at the time, in my mindset, I was still working through some things. And I say and see, that's where we go wrong. I was working through some things, and so I hesitated. I knew that I wanted to move back to Chicago because I wanted to be obedient, and I believe that it was time, just not at the time that he was telling me. So I closed my business, and in January, some things transpired in my living, and that is when God was positioning me at that time. Now, I had a beautiful 3-bedroom townhouse, 1.5 bathroom that God had blessed me with back in 2018 when I needed to leave a situation. God opened the doors. And remember, I was saying in a previous video, God had poured out blessing and favor tremendously because he knew that that was a part of me moving forward into new beginnings. So I got in a townhouse, beautiful townhouse for me and my children. And in December, when God began to position me out of my business and I closed, I was like, okay, God, what's next? Right? And so a lot of times God will do things to position you. It may not necessarily be how you would think he would do it, but he'll do it if he's trying to get something out of you, or there's something else that he needs you to do. So January came and I was like, okay, I'll move back in June to Chicago once the kids are out of school. And God was like, oh no, it's time for you to go. And in February, I began to make the transition. And it was so difficult because I had been living where I was living for 17 years. That's what I knew. I had established my business there. I had grown so much during that time. I had did things that I never thought that I was capable of doing. And notice the whole time I'm saying I, right? Now, did God definitely gave me the ability to get all. I could have never done that, right? But the thing was, I had taken him out of the equation. I had begun to make everything else a God. I had begun to idolize my business. I had begun to idolize where I was in life. And so God had to shake some things up. So I was willing to go. I just didn't know that in my willingness to go, I'm thinking things would go another way. But I was still like, okay, God, I'm gonna go. I came back to Chicago, living with my sister, a blessing, own room and everything. Was it that 3-bedroom townhouse I had? No. But I was blessed that I have a place to come to, because in that moment God was like, okay, it's time for you to go. I had closed my business. I had sold everything. I had some savings, and at the time I wasn't even concerned necessarily about how I would manage things. I just said, okay, God, I'm gonna go ahead and go. I got here, and when I tell you, God began to show me some things, and he had to really break some things off of me, because here it is. I'm like, okay, God, I went back to Chicago in obedience, to do what you were calling me to do. I hadn't even determined if I was going to establish my skincare business here. I have my second business that I loved creating in, and I was like, well, I'll do that in the interim. But I was just really being obedient to what he was telling me, to come back to Chicago and do whatever it is that he would have me to do. So I wasn't even really thinking about the business. And so as time went on, I'm like, okay, God, like, it doesn't seem like anything's happening. It seems like I am in warfare. I am in turmoil to an extent, because although I came back to where my immediate family was, and I was in a great place as far as mentally, more than I had ever been, in a sense of not feeling like I had to carry all that I was carrying. I was able to focus on me a little more. But in that, God began to pull off layers. And in that pulling off layers, I began to identify things that I wasn't able to identify in the city that I was in, that I was so complacent in, because I had built a life there. And in that life that I had built, I had also, of course, like I say, I was in relationship with God, but I was more in the things of the world. I was more into the things that I desired, those things which I thought, made a difference, made me happy, made me who I was, and not who God had called me to be. And so when I got back here, I had to face those things. And even things that I had initially, when I walked away from Chicago, I left unhealed. When I left, I was running away from a lot of things. And that was one of my reasons why I was so hesitant in coming back for so many years. But God had begun to do things in my walk with him in the last year, although I hadn't totally surrendered, because I was just like, okay, God, I'm feeling like I'm stuck. I don't even know where to go, what to do. I just want to make sure that I'm being obedient to what you're telling me to do. And so with that being said, things began to happen, and I was just like, God, you didn't bring me back here for me to begin to suffer spiritually. Notice I said spiritually. Although I was used to a certain way of living, in my mindset, I'm like, listen, I felt like I had it all. Things were great. Things were really happening for me back in my old town. And then I get to Chicago, and it's like I'm starting over. And I was okay with the starting over, because what I know is a lot of times those things that we have become accustomed to and we've idolized, we have to know when to let it go for what it is that God has in store for us. What God has for us is always bigger and better than our plan and the things that we feel like we have. And that can be a materialistic thing, because I was very materialistic. But God had put me in a position where I had to literally trust him. Had I trusted him before? Yeah. But I wasn't 100% trusting him. I was trusting him when I felt like I needed him to do something that only he could do. But I wasn't trusting him even in those moments where things seemed to be going well. So in this whole, it's remember I said laboring, expecting, it's a process. And in my process, God had to definitely break some things up off of my life in order for me to really begin to see that I have to give him full control. I have to be obedient and do what it is that he's calling me to do and purpose me to do. And at first I thought his purpose would be that I would come back and of course I would speak his word, be on fire for him, and win souls and things like that. But then I began to go through some things where I was just like, okay, God, are you there? Can you hear me, God? Did you really bring me back here to, just leave me out there? And listen, God has been sustaining me. And these 7 months that I've been here, he has been sustaining me. He has definitely poured his favor over my life. But in that, I've been laboring to trust him at his word, to follow him, to surrender, and to take my hands off of things and to allow him to be God. I was wanting to do things my way and didn't even realize that until things began to happen where I had to be like, okay, God, you got it. you got this. I can't do it by myself. I can't do it in my power. You got this. And so with us going into September, I wanted to be clear about that laboring process and what that looked like for me. God has really been revealing, removing, rebuilding, restoring. And it didn't always look like what I expected it to look like. But it always works together for my good. Even in the transitioning, even in the adjusting, because it was an adjustment. When you're comfortable and then you got to be uncomfortable, and you have to really be able to maneuver through some things, navigate through some things that you've never had to. If you don't have God, oh, it'll take you out. It will take you out. I remember making sure my policy was in place and saying to God, like, God, if you have me here, and it was just for me to come back, for me to get my rest, then that's what I'll do, because what I'm carrying right now is real heavy. It's really heavy, because what I had known was back at my old residence. Yes, I've known Chicago because I was born and raised here, but 17 years I was there. That was my life. And I was grieving. I was grieving not being there. I didn't desire to go back, but I was grieving what I had known for so long. So when I say the laboring has been great, so the expectancy of the reward, I know is great. That's all I got today. I just want to share a part of my story turned testimony as God continues to rebuild and restore and do what he needs to do through me for the kingdom. You guys have a good weekend, and I'll see you later.